Greetings, everyone. My name is Tim Keyes, and welcome to God Save the King. And you can listen to God Save the King every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Truth Be Told radio network. All you have to do is go to www.truthbetoldnetwork.org and click the big listen button, and you can listen to God Save the King and all the other great shows that are on the Truth Be Told radio network. So again, this is God Save the King on Truth Be Told Radio Network Friday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern. Now, there's other ways that you can listen to both God Save the King and these other great shows on TBTRN. You can go to their website, like I said, but you can also use your Android app. You can use MyTuner, Wi-Fi radio, TuneIn radio. You can also, of course, use Alexa, Google, and Apple home devices. And last but not least, you can dial in on your phone. You can dial 641-741-2866 or 717-567-4977 and listen on your phone. So welcome to God Save the King. So in our last episode, I was continuing to speak about dialing in this revised chronology of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, so one of the fundamental premises of God Save the King is that Jesus was not born on December 25th. And of course, we mentioned the fact that there's a lot of people that is very startling to them. They've never heard that before, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe that's true. And then they'll say, okay, so prove it. Prove that he wasn't born on December 25th. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm splitting hairs. Okay, I'm splitting hairs because what I'm doing is I'm using the rules of evidence. I don't have to prove that he was not born on December 25th. All I have to do is prove that it's far more likely that he was born on a different date. And if you are someone who desperately wants him to be born on December 25th, then it's your job to prove that he was born on December 25th. And what we've been doing here on the last couple of episodes is that I have been stepping through the chronological information that we find in the infancy narratives. Okay, so there's two of those. There's an infancy narrative in Matthew, and there's an infancy narrative in Luke. Now, we are predominantly using the one in Luke because the two infancy narratives don't really overlap all that much. They do overlap a little bit. There's a couple of common elements to the two infancy narratives, but mostly they cover separate information. It actually, chronologically, it starts in Luke, and then it shifts over to Matthew, and then it goes back to Luke, and then it goes back to Matthew. Kind of goes back and forth, but there's actually very little true overlap. They pretty much talk about different things, okay? So, but we've been going through the evidence, and like I said, the way this works is I want to start with the largest chunks of time we can. See, because like I said, there's a lot of chronological information in these records. There is a ton, frankly, of chronological information in these records. So what we need to do is look at these pieces of evidence, starting with the largest ones, and then just keep narrowing it down and narrowing it down and narrowing it down until we get to what we believe is a more accurate date for the birth of Jesus Christ. Now, we've already given you the punchline many, many, many times. I believe that Jesus was born on September 11th, 3 BC, according to the Gregorian calendar, which would have been Rosh Hashanah on the Jewish calendar that year. So in other words, he was born as they were literally blowing trumpets in the temple announcing his birth. And the Feast of Trumpets was also the day that the Jews either straight up coronated their kings, or if they didn't actually coronate their king on that date, they reckoned the regnal date of that king's reign from the Feast of Trumpets, from the Feast of Rosh Hashanah. So it really, if you're a Bible student and you understand what the types and symbols mean and how significant those are, it is extraordinarily significant to realize that Jesus was probably born on a Jewish feast day. I mean, that's just amazingly significant because we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, frankly, that when he was crucified in conjunction with the spring feasts, right? He was crucified at the same time the Passover lambs were being slaughtered, okay? He was raised from the dead on the Feast of First Fruits, okay? And he was the unleavened bread, okay, that came down from heaven. So he was most definitely crucified in correspondence with the spring feasts. It really shouldn't surprise us that there's the high likelihood that he was born on a Jewish feast day. So in our previous shows, and as we started to step through this evidence, we started with the reign of Augustus Caesar, okay? So Augustus Caesar, just a quick review here, reigned from 27 BC to 14 AD. That's a 40-year window. Jesus was definitely born during that time, right? Then we talked extensively about the reign of Herod the Great. We know Jesus was also born during the reign of Herod the Great. Herod reigned from 37 BC to 1 BC, not 4 BC, 1 BC. And we spend a lot of time talking about that in one of the other episodes, that the 4 BC date that was put forth by Emil Schur in the late 19th century is probably incorrect. Herod most likely died in late January or early February of 1 BC. Very, very, very important, because that allows us to search a 3-year period of time between 4 BC and 1 BC that we weren't searching before. Okay, when everybody was engrossed in believing that Emil Schur's date was correct, we were only looking earlier than 4 BC. And of course, we weren't finding the evidence we needed to find because we were limiting our search parameters. But now with the corrected birth date of 4 BC, the corrected birth date of let's get this straight here. I'm talking too fast. With the corrected date of Herod's death being early 1 BC, now we know we can search the years of 4, 3, 2, and 1 BC for all of these other chronological indicators, which we're going to talk about today, and cross-reference all of them, overlap them, overlay them, and try to determine when Jesus would have been born, okay? So those are the two big ones that are measured in large chunks of years, okay? Augustus between 27 and 14, and then Herod between 37 and 1. If you overlap them, that means Jesus was born between 27 BC and 1 BC, a 26-year period of time. But then we can radically reduce that by looking at these other parameters that we find in the nativity narratives, okay, in the infancy narratives, all right? So last episode, we talked extensively about this character named Quirinius, all right, the Roman, quote unquote, governor, okay, that people are familiar with Quirinius because of the Christmas story. If it weren't for the Christmas story, most people probably never really would know who Quirinius was. But the interesting thing is that we know a lot about Quirinius because he was an extensive Roman figure. So I just want to review this pretty quickly. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. We spent quite a bit of time on it during the last session. I want to cover it very briefly here because as we read in Luke chapter 2, verse 2, this taxation or this census or this registration was first made when Cyrenius, or Quirinius is the preferred spelling, was the governor of Syria. Now, this statement, however, while Quirinius was governor of Syria, has been a source of significant confusion because if we look at the official Roman records, a man named Sentius Saturnius was clearly the governor of Roman Syria during the time frame that we want to examine, right? Additionally, the Romans were experts at census taking, and they were also experts at taxation. And if we look for either a census or a taxation conducted by Quirinius in the time frame that we're examining in Judea as an extension of Roman Syria, we simply don't find one. And then to make matters worse, what we do see, however, is that historical records confirm that Quirinius became governor of Roman Syria in 6 AD, and he did hold a census and organized a taxation at that time. So the result of this is that by looking at, if you look at the one in 6 AD, right, then it's really easy to conclude that Luke to think that, well, that must be the one. That must be the one, but it throws the chronology completely off. So what we did last time is we spent a lot of time looking at the possibility that there was actually another census, okay? And there was, or another registration, because what we find out, see, it's very interesting how this is phrased here. If we look at how this verse is phrased, okay, let me get back there. And this taxing was first made when Quirinius was governor of Syria. If you go into the Greek, we can discover that a better translation would be, this was the first registration held by Quirinius when he was one who governs in Syria. So I don't want to belabor that. I don't want to spend too much time there. But I did want to review that, because the point that I'm trying to make here is the fact that Quirinius was a Roman leader in the Roman province of Syria at the time in question. Okay. Unlike what the critics want to claim, Quirinius was a Roman leader in the Roman province of Syria during the time in question. And we have also pointed to a different taxation, okay, or a different registration that was held at that time that is supported by a couple of different historical references. We talked about the historical reference of Paulus Orosius and then also Josephus. They were referring to a registration that happened in Roman Syria about the time, okay, that Jesus was born. And this is the one that they are referring to, is this earlier registration. It's actually nowhere near as complicated as it seems. It's really quite clear if you look at the records and look at what they're talking about, that once again, Quirinius was indeed a governor in Roman Syria in the years just prior to the birth of Christ, and that therefore, and there was a decree that went out from Augustus Caesar that involved the registration at about that time. So this detail just simply is not the problem that a lot of the critics want to make it out to be. So I want to stop there, however. I don't want to just beat that one into the ground anymore. But the point being is that if you look at the reign of Augustus Caesar, we covered that. We look at the reign of Herod the Great, we covered that. Now we've covered the governorship of Quirinius. They all line up with a likely birth date of Jesus being in 2 or 3 BC, not 4 BC or earlier. This all lines up. This all makes sense. Now, I want to jump to another particular record at the moment that, you know, it kind of appears to be out of place, but it's really not, because it'll help confirm a couple of things. So let me take a second here to click on, StreamYard here and get some things lined up. Try to get, oh, good grief, don't do that. There we go. Oh, got to do that. Do that. There we go. I want to get one of my other graphics up on the screen here so that we can look at this. All right. So we want, I want this one right here. So here we go. So if you happen to be looking at this on video, you can look at the screen. If not, you can just listen to me read this. This is actually Luke chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. All right. Now this is in Jesus's public ministry when he was, quote unquote, about 30 years old. We're going to read that here in 1 second. So Luke chapter 3, verses 1 through 3 reads, "Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea, and of the region of Trachonitis, and Lysanias, and tetrarch of Abilene, Annas and Caiaphas being the high priests. The word of God came unto John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness, and he came into all the country about Jordan, preaching the baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. Okay, so this is the introduction to Jesus's earthly ministry when he was about 30 years old. Because if we jump forward to Luke chapter 3, verse 23, it reads, and Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli. Okay, so the point of this is that this is, again, this is another chronological marker. Okay, we're going off of primarily here, we're going off of the fact that it mentions the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Okay, now it also mentions the fact that Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. And this is, I want to bring this up really quick, because if we go back to a previous session and back to talking about Quirinius for just one moment, this is the standard word for governor. Okay, Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor of the Roman province of Judea at this time, right? But the word used for Quirinius in the previous record that we talked about is not the usual word for the governor. It's the word for a governor, one who governs. So bringing that up just as a point of comparison, it helps us figure out what's going on. But the point here is that the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Jesus was 30 years old. Okay, Jesus was about, so we have to assume from how this is phrased, and Jesus began to be about 30 years of age. That means he's probably, late 29 years old and about to have his birthday. Okay, so he's about 30 years old, right? So now the question obviously becomes, well, okay, then what's the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar? Because if we can figure out what the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar was, then all we have to do very simply is do the math, and that will get us, hopefully, hopefully the evidence turns out the way we want it to, not just wishful thinking here. But if we can figure out when the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar was, then subtract 30 years, we got a pretty good idea when Jesus was born. So here we go. Tiberius reigned from 14 AD or 14 CE, 14 Common Era, until 37 CE. Now, this means, so if that's when he reigned, right? If he began reigning in 14 CE, and the record we just read is mentioning his 15th year, then let's do the calculations, okay? So if his first year was, and we know he was coronated in the fall, okay, so that just helps us a lot. We know he was coronated in the fall, so he was coronated in the fall of 14 AD or 14 CE, okay? Well, that means his first year was from the fall of 14 to the fall of 15, okay? Now, if we're looking for his 15th year, okay, you don't actually add 15, you add 14 to get the 15th year, okay? Following me? So that means his 15th year would be from the fall of 28 until the fall of 29, right? And all you have to do very simply is subtract 30 years, and it lands you right in the fall of 3 BC. Okay, which is what our hypothesis is. Okay, see, because if his 15th year is 28 BC, see, we'll do this slowly here. Subtract 10, and we got to subtract 30 years, right? So 10 years earlier is 18, is the fall of 18, right? 20 years earlier is the fall of 08. Okay. And so that's 20 years. So now we got 10 more years to go. So, I'm holding, for those of you that are listening on radio, I'm holding up my hands and actually counting on my fingers here. Okay. That if We got 10 years to go. So we're in 08. So we go 07, 06, 05, 04, 03, 02, 01, 1 BC, 2 BC, 3 BC. That is exactly 30 years. So this one is a pretty hyper accurate indication of when Jesus was born, because if this is accurate, you know, this only falls apart if this information isn't accurate. But if he was born, pardon me, if he was born 30 years, he was about 30 years old in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar's reign, then he was born in 3 BC. And then, although this is a little bit of speculation, the fact that Tiberius was born in the fall and that Jesus was likely born in the fall, you know, it's funny because the Apostle Luke often gets a bad rap as being a poor historian, right? And it's a lot of it is from that Quirinius record that I mentioned earlier, right? That because Quirinius is absolutely proven to have been the governor of Roman Syria in 6 AD, a lot of people look at that part of the record and go, yeah, see, Luke's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's a really terrible historian. No, he wasn't. Luke was a really, really good historian. He was very meticulous. He really paid attention to what he was doing. And when you don't limit your search parameters, okay, you can find some pretty amazing stuff for what he figured out. So here we go. Last time, 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, subtract 30 years, okay, because that would have been 28 to 29 AD. You subtract 30 years, you get the fall of 3 BC. Okay. So now, even if for the moment we give ourselves, 2 to 3 years either side of that, as wobble room while we examine the rest of the evidence, okay, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. We're examining the evidence. The smart thing for the moment is, give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room here, right? Where does the rest of the evidence point, right? But if we're looking at, because now that's well within the reign of Augustus, it's well within the reign of Herod. We know that Quirinius was a governor in Roman Syria at this time. And now you've got, 3 BC. Interesting. This all lines up, right? So now, just to go back there for a second, let's go back to our hypothesis, because that's all it is. Let's go back to our hypothesis that Jesus was born on December 25th. Okay, well, none of this points to December 25th. Okay, not at all, right? Now, granted, so far we're only talking about what year he was born in. We haven't really talked about what month he was born in. I mean, the thing with Tiberius kind of indicates that, but not absolutely, right? But what about this is pointing us at December 25th? Nothing is pointing us at December 25th. And of course, everybody wants to bring up the shepherds. We've already talked about that in other episodes. I'll mention it briefly here. Anybody with a brain knows that shepherds don't watch their flocks in open field in the winter. Now, that is not the silver bullet everybody thinks it is, but it is yet another piece of the puzzle that when we put this together, it's like, I'm sorry, folks, these pieces of evidence are not leading us towards a winter birth. They're leading us towards a fall birth. That's what they're doing. All right. So now I want to move on, and I want to talk about something here that's pretty interesting. And we also last time we also talked about the pardon me here, the margin of error for Herod, right? Okay. We talked about the margin. We talked about the registration. Okay. So the registration, see, that's another piece of the puzzle here, is that we know that Augustus was declared pater patriae in early 2 BC, and that recognition of being pater patriae by the Roman Senate would have required a census and a registration. So in order to get that, and an oath of allegiance, right? So in order to get that done in time, that probably started about 9 months earlier in 3 BC, okay, to get that registration done in time so that they could declare Caesar as being pater patriae, right? So that makes sense, because if Joseph and Mary got word of that registration in the late spring or early summer of 3 BC, and then they beat feet off to Bethlehem, right? And then the record clearly says while they were there, the days came about that she should be delivered. They traveled much earlier in Mary's pregnancy than the traditional nativity story tells us, right? Now, we've talked about that in other episodes. We're going to talk about it more in additional episodes. The traditional nativity story, I'm sorry, is so full of holes. But what I'm driving at here is the fact that it is such an enormous part of our collective psyche, right? We've heard the traditional nativity story so many times that we default to believing it even when we don't even realize we're doing it. I've been researching this for 35 years, and I still fall into the habit pattern of thinking that the traditional story has merit when it really has almost none. Pretty much everything about it is demonstrably false. It's amazing, so because Joseph and Mary did not travel late in Mary's pregnancy. That doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Right? And even if they did, part of the reason, okay, we're reviewing here, right, is that I poke a lot of fun at the whole donkey thing. There's just no way you put an 8-month pregnant woman, or let alone a 9-month pregnant woman, on the back of a donkey when she's that pregnant. You just don't do it, okay? But even if they rode in a cart, right, which would have been the case, if that were true at that time, right? If that were true at that time and they rode in a cart, my God, you still wouldn't do that unless you just absolutely had no choice. That's just ridiculous. And then why? Unless, okay, let's play what if for a second. Unless that decree came out from Caesar and it said everybody must go to their ancestral hometown and you have to leave now, right? In other words, the deadline is within a week or 10 days. Unless that was the case, there's no way this went down the way we think it did. And there's no way the Romans would have done that. That would have been ridiculous. There's no way they ever would have said, "Oh yeah, we're going to take a census, and oh yeah, by the way, it needs to be done in a week." Yeah, not going to happen. This is something that would have taken months to do. In other words, first off, just for the word of the registration to make it to the far ends of the empire, so that they could get the announcement out, and then allow for the people to travel to their hometown and then collect the data and then get it back to Rome. You see, you've got to be talking about months here. So there's no way that Joseph and Mary were under some massive time crunch where they absolutely had to go right now, right this minute. It just didn't happen that way, because that would have been the only reason they would have traveled with Mary that pregnant. My God, they just wouldn't have done it that way, right? But if we look at this more rationally and we realize that they more than likely traveled much earlier in Mary's pregnancy, she was probably only 3 or 4 months pregnant when they traveled. Now, you actually could put her on the back of a donkey. There's the irony. You actually could put her on the back of a donkey. You certainly could put her in the back of a cart. And for that matter, at 3 or 4 months, she probably could have walked. Sure, she would have gotten a little more tired, I suppose, but every woman is different in her pregnancy. I've known women who are extraordinarily energetic very late in their pregnancy. So, yeah, okay. All right. So anyway, But let's move on. Let's talk about some other stuff here. I actually want to get a different graphic up here. So bear with me one sec while I click the mouse and find this correct graphic here. There we go. Boom, boom. Okay, let's get this up on the screen. Okay, now this piece of information all by itself doesn't prove precise timing. But what it does help us understand is the fact that the Magi and the shepherds were not both present at the birth of Christ. And that's what we're about to talk about next. So that's why I'm bringing this up. But if we read the records in both Matthew and in Luke, okay, Matthew chapter 2, Luke chapter 2, what we discover is that when the angels appeared to the shepherds, the angels told the shepherds, you will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger, right? Now, we'll talk about that in more detail on another show, but that's a very short period of time. That's measured in minutes. The swaddling clothes thing, that's measured in minutes, but it says they would find a baby in a manger, wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. So the Greek word for baby here is the Greek word brephos, okay? And it means a baby, all right? But when you read the interrelated records about the Magi, we are told that the Magi found a young child in a house, right? And the Greek word for a young child is a paidion, right? And you know, that means a young child, right? A toddler, right? So the shepherds did indeed find a baby lying in a manger, but the Magi found a young child in a house, right? So the shepherds and the Magi were not both present at the birth of Christ. The Magi arrived much later, a year and 3 months later, okay? So, but here's so what else I want to mention here, this is the reason I bring this up, is because let's think about this for a second. So once again, let's talk about this. Let's look into this here. If the Magi were indeed there at the birth of Christ, we are told in the record that the Magi were warned in a dream not to go back to Herod. And then when Herod learned that the Magi did not come back and had departed to go back to their own country another way, that's when Herod instituted the slaughter of the innocents, okay? Now, think about this. If this happened after the Magi were, quote unquote, at the birth of Jesus, then this happened within a matter of days. A matter of days after Jesus was born, okay? That very quickly becomes a huge problem because we are told, okay, of certain events that happened immediately after Jesus was born, okay? The first one of these things is the fact that he was circumcised on the 8th day, okay? All right, so 8 days later, Jesus is circumcised, right? So somebody might try to say, well, they could do that on the road. Well, yeah, okay. I'm not buying it, right? Then there is also Mary's purification, right? Because when a woman gave birth due to the shedding of blood, she was considered ceremonially unclean, right? So she had to go through ritual purification before she and Joseph would be able to bring Jesus to the temple in Jerusalem for his, dedication, quote unquote, right? So the way that works out, so here we go. Now this is kind of detailed here, but that's why we're taking the time to look at this stuff, right? That's the whole point of what we're doing here is we're taking some time to look at this. Leviticus 12 gives us the details concerning Mary's purification according to the law of Moses. For the first 7 days after giving birth, if it was a male child, a woman was considered ceremonially unclean, as in the days of her customary impurity. Okay, so in other words, just like her monthly menstrual cycle, she would be considered ceremonially unclean for 7 days, right? But that's the first 7 days after giving birth. Now, once the first 7 days are passed, beginning on the 8th day, a second period of 33 days commenced, right? So during those first 7 days, if anyone else touched Mary, they became, touched a woman who had shed blood like this, given birth. So if Joseph touched her, right, he is ceremonially unclean as well. Okay? But then on the 8th day, beginning the second period of 33 days, anyone who touched her would not be ceremonially unclean. But what this means is add up the numbers. It would take until the 41st day would be the day that Mary could actually go to the temple, right? So you add, almost 7 weeks, right, to the birth date of Jesus Christ. Jesus of Nazareth was when Mary would be allowed to go to the temple. Well, this is critical because if this is going on because Mary's not traveling, got news for you. She just gave birth. Okay. So, now people will say, well, but, of course she had to travel. I mean, their lives were in danger. The Magi didn't go back to Herod and Herod figured it out. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That just doesn't add up. Number one, the Magi weren't there. But even if we're playing speculation and saying that the Magi were there, you got real problems getting these chronological elements to harmonize. They're just not going to fall in line. And frankly, the critics would legitimately have a field day with this. They really would, because if all this is going on at the same time, then it doesn't make any sense. It really does not make any sense, because she has just given birth. She's got to rest, right? She is ceremonially unclean for seven days minimum, then another 33 days. Joseph likely is ceremonially unclean, right? Because he probably wasn't right there at the birth, because traditionally at that time, the women would have shooed the men out of the house, and then the midwife would have shown up, and then they would have, right, Mary would have given birth. But, day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I guarantee you Joseph is right there. I guarantee you he is right there. So he's probably ceremonially unclean as well. Then, the second period of time. So for 40 days, they didn't move. They didn't move. Now, some people will try to say, oh, well, it took that long for the word to get back to Herod. Are you joking? He was only 6 miles away. 6 miles. Okay. For it to take that long, that makes no sense. That makes no sense whatsoever. Right. So the reason I'm pointing all this out, frankly, is because it helps us understand that the Magi were not there. Right. The Magi were not there at his birth, which means my proposed chronology of working backwards, Herod died in early 1 BC. The Magi actually arrived, okay, because we're going to talk about this in 1 second here. The Magi actually arrived in December of 2 BC, right? But see, now take note, because here you go again, because now here is Herod's margin for error, right? Because Herod killed every baby, every young male child, 2 years and under, right? But it says that he diligently inquired of the wise men. He diligently inquired of the wise men when they saw the star, right? Okay, so look at this. This is Matthew chapter 2, verses 7 and 16. It says, then Herod, when he had privily called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. Then jumping to verse 16, which is when Herod finds out that he's been duped by the wise men. Then Herod, when he saw he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coast thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Now, take note of that, because it says he diligently inquired, right? He was paying attention. He said, when did this star appear? So now this is important, because when we get around to actually talking about what was it that the Magi saw, this tells us that whatever it was they saw was related to his date of birth. Now, I believe they saw a series of events, not a singular event, okay? And we'll get to that when we get to that. I believe that the Magi saw a series of events, not a singular event, right? So I think that's part of why Herod did this margin for error. I think there was two reasons. Number one is because if it was not a singular event, then Herod would have went, okay, all right, I've got to go with the earliest possible date, right? And then even if it was a singular event, Herod was the kind of guy that I really believe he would have added a margin of error on top of this, right? To quote unquote, make sure he gets him, right? If he's roughly 15 years old, 15 months old, if he's roughly 15 months old, then I'm going to add 9 months. We're going to go 2 years and younger to make sure we get him, right? Besides, for that matter, I don't think that his henchmen, right, his spec ops guys, I doubt they went into the homes and crashed into the homes of these Judeans in Bethlehem, found any male child, and then got picky about it, right? When was he born? He was born 23 months ago, not 25 months ago. Okay, well, we won't kill him, right? I don't think that was what it was. I believe they went, okay, that's a 2-year-old. Okay, done. Knife to the heart, done, right? It's horrible to think that way, but you have to imagine that that's how it went down, right? But the point being is that, Herod diligently inquired of the wise men. Diligently inquired, okay? So if he died in 1 BC, okay, early 1 BC, okay, then working backwards, this puts a fall birth date of 3 BC right smack in the middle of where we are hoping to find it. We haven't absolutely proven it yet, but once again, all of the pieces of the puzzle are pointing to this. And then, like I just said, Mary gives birth. There's 40 days of purification. And then it says they went to the temple. Okay, so then they went to the temple, right? They haven't left Bethlehem. They did not leave Bethlehem for a minimum of 40 days. And then they went to the temple. I do not believe for 1 second that the Magi hung around for 40 days. And especially once we talk more in depth about the Magi, because that's another component of this that is incorrect. This wasn't just 3 wise guys on camels who were, just kind of quietly, sauntering about Judea, Jerusalem and Bethlehem. This was based upon the Magi's job description, this was a large ambassadorial entourage. And that's why it would have made sense for Herod to flip out, okay? Because not only were they inquiring about a legitimate threat to his throne, they were showing up in significant numbers, in numbers enough that they were going to say, hey, the legitimate king of the Jews is born in Judea, and and there it is, right? So all of that to say, the fact that you've got these additional components mentioned here, right? Mary's purification, then they visit the temple. They are greeted by both Simeon and Anna in the temple. Okay? Right? So these are all things that had to happen while they were still in Judea. They haven't left. They haven't left. So therefore, if the Magi were there at their birth, this is a massive problem. These pieces of the puzzle do not line up well if the Magi were there at his birth. If they arrive 15 months later, we've got no problem. We've got no problem whatsoever. It all makes sense. Okay? It all makes sense. So these are, really important pieces of the puzzle as we use these things to determine, what is the likely time frame that he was born in. So to kind of, start to wrap it up here and, review all of this again, Augustus Caesar, 27 BC to 14 AD, right? Herod the Great, 37 BC to 1 BC. Overlap those, throw out the 10 years from 37 to 27, throw out the 15 years from 1 to 14. You've got a 26-year window of time. We can radically reduce that because we know that Jesus was born in the vicinity. See, because here's the other part, right? So, because working backwards is what really helps us out. So once the slaughter of the innocents does occur, right? Once the slaughter of the innocents does occur, and Joseph is told in a dream, take the young child and his mother and get out, right? Get the heck out, right? Can't say GTFO, right? Get the heck out of Dodge. Get out of here, right? It says that he moves in haste, that he gets up, grabs Mary and the baby, and not the baby. See, there it is. See, there's that sneaky thing again of the traditional nativity story is so entrenched, right? He grabs Mary and the young child. He grabs Mary and the young child and takes off, right? And then while they are in Egypt, see, that's when Herod dies. So Herod doesn't die very long after, right? So in other words, the point is they're not in Egypt for, years, okay? Maybe 1 year total, right? But I think even that is too long. I think it's more likely measured in months, right? But the point being is that once the Magi were there, once the slaughter of the innocents did occur, Joseph and Mary and Jesus, they get up and they bug out and they go to Egypt, right? Okay. So so when you start to put these pieces together, you start to see that this is all in quite close proximity, right? It's spread out more than we thought, right? It didn't happen in just a matter of a few days or a few weeks, which is what the traditional story would tend to indicate. It did happen over about, I would say my best guesstimate is from the birth of Jesus until Joseph and Mary return from Egypt and then decide to go back to Nazareth, right? That's when that happened. We're going to talk about that too. That's another one that people want to have a field day with, is they want to try to claim that Jesus and Mary went back to Nazareth immediately and then went back to Bethlehem, right? Which doesn't make sense. I've even heard people try to say that the Magi visited them in Nazareth, not in Bethlehem, and that makes no sense whatsoever. It doesn't fit with the biblical record. It doesn't fit with the historical record. It just doesn't make sense, right? But once again, the point being is that once the Magi were there, once the slaughter of the innocents did occur, Joseph and Mary got up and left, and then rather shortly after that is when Herod died. Okay, so this is a relatively short period of time, and if we guesstimate that maybe Joseph and Mary were in Egypt for 6 to 9 months, I think that's a really fair estimate, that they were in Egypt for maybe 6 to 9 months. That would mean if the Magi visited in December, of 2 BC. And then the slaughter of the innocents occurred, and that would have been in December, or at the latest January of 1 BC. And then Joseph gets the word, get out, get up and get out, right? Well, that means they took off in January of 1 BC, and you give them 6 to 9 months. Well, that's June to September, roughly, of 1 BC is when they came back. And then when they realized that Herod's son ruled in his place, that's when they decided to travel to Nazareth, right? To go back to Nazareth. I do not believe that they traveled back to Nazareth before that, right? That's a lot of people want to put that in there. Like I said, we'll take another episode and examine that a little more closely. We'll look at the record in Luke that it's pretty easy to see that that's not what happened, right? They're trying to force something out of the text that really isn't there. So to wrap this up, super quick review here. Augustus Caesar, big chunk of time, 27 to 14. Herod, 37 to 1. Reduce that, 27 to 1. But then you go, Herod died, right? Work backwards. Magi, 2-year margin of error. Then the thing with Tiberius Caesar, that lands you in 3 BC. The fact that Joseph and Mary would have stuck around Bethlehem for about 40 days minimum before they could have wandered off. And then we're not going to do it today. We're going to do it in a different episode. We've got to talk about the timing of John the Baptist when he was born, because we're told he was born 6 months prior to Jesus. And we're told that Zechariah ministered in the temple in Jerusalem according to the division of Abijah. And that will help us even fine-tune this even more. And we'll leave it with this. I'm getting ready to wrap up here, okay? But we'll leave you with a great fun fact or a great question to close out the show with here. Because a lot of people want to claim that the slaughter of the innocents was this big deal, right? And that you actually have the critics want to say that it didn't happen. The critics want to say, oh, no, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. Oh, my foot, it didn't happen. And believe it or not, a lot of them want to claim that it didn't happen because it wasn't keeping in Herod's character. And it's like, oh, my God, you don't understand Herod at all. It's absolutely in keeping with Herod's character. But here's where I think they miss it. They want to claim that this would have been a really big deal, that it's like hundreds or maybe even thousands of children were killed. No, it was 10, 15, 20 maybe, max. And want to know the reason I know that? The reason I didn't know that, the reason I know that is because they didn't get John the Baptist. And John the Baptist would have only been 6 months older than Jesus. And he only lived 6 miles away. So their search area couldn't have been very big. I doubt it expanded more than a mile or maybe 2 past Bethlehem. Because it says Bethlehem and the coasts thereof. Okay, so yeah, a mile, maybe 2 max. But it wasn't even 3, 4, 5, 6 miles. And the reason we know that is because they didn't get John the Baptist. Because if they had been searching and killing within 10 or 20 miles, they would have got John the Baptist. Okay, and that wouldn't have been good. Okay, so that's wrapping it up for today. A lot of more chronological information that is pointing us, as we follow this, it is pointing us towards a fall 3 BC birthday. So stay tuned for more information. We're going to talk about John the Baptist and his father Zechariah and Elizabeth and the course of Abijah and how that influences the timing as well. And then, of course, once we get there, we're going to put in the astronomy. What did the Magi see that caused them to travel to Judea, the court of Herod the Great? I believe they stopped in Caesarea first, then Jerusalem, then Bethlehem. Amazing stuff, an amazing story. So this is going to wrap it up. Once again, my name is Tim Kies, and this is God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. Wrapping up the show, remember that my views expressed by me here on my show on Truth Be Told Radio Network. They're not necessarily the views of the Truth Be Told Radio Network. They are my views and they're my responsibility. And remember, you can listen to my show and all the other great shows on the Truth Be Told Radio Network on their website at www.truthbetoldnetwork.org. Just go there and click on the big listen button. Remember, you can also listen on your Android app, MyTuner, Wi-Fi Radio, and TuneIn Radio. Once again, of course, Alexa, Google, and Apple home devices, and calling in at 641-741-2866 or 717-567-4977. You can dial in and you can listen on your phone. So that's it for this episode of God Save the King on TBTRN. Talking too fast there. Tim Kai signing off.